We all have paradigms and roadblocks that prevent us from excelling, and they can be real or imagined. Welcome to Beyond Bricks, a podcast that will give you the ability to break through those walls. Here's Dr. Nathan Unruh.
People don't always like when I make this statement, but I had to make the statement when I look myself in the mirror. Hey, if your life sucks, it's because you suck. So the solution is stop sucking. So how do you stop sucking? Is you got to do some self-reflection. I strongly believe God doesn't make junk. We're all made in his self-image. He don't make junk. He gives us all gifts, talents, and abilities. Those are his gifts to us. What is our gift back to him is what we do with them. Welcome, everyone, to this conversation. I'm super excited to have a good friend with me, Josh Shaw. Josh and I have been running around together for a number of years. We're like-minded individuals who are always trying to innovate our businesses, trying to figure out how to do things better. And so we've met each other. I think we met through Brad Lee initially, didn't we, Josh?
Sure, we did.
Yeah. And so, Brad got us connected. And since then, we've had a ton of great conversations. I've loved to be a part of your journey. You've inspired me. But what I want today, the listeners to hear, is something about Josh that so many of us, I think, need to hear. We need to hear about adversity. We need to hear about transparency. We need to hear a message of hope. No matter where we're at in our lives right now, Josh has a story that I know will impact you. So Josh is now currently living in Wisconsin. But Josh, I'm going to shut my mouth for a minute, and I want you to tell us your story, brother. Tell us where you grew up and kind of take us along your path.
Sure. So I grew up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, small town in between Green Bay and Milwaukee, right on the lake there. It's a small town in the sense of not a lot of people around, but doesn't mean like life can't grab you, right? My parents, they divorced at a young age. I was probably 5 or 6, right in that age. My father went off to marry and have kids. My mother she found herself just meeting trash, if you would. He would beat her, hit us, verbally abuse us, break our stuff. And it was just an ongoing process of that. So you had during the weekdays, I was with my mom, right? And then on the weekends, I would go over to my dad's house on the weekends where he was trying to live this new life. And I felt like my dad wasn't my dad. He was living through this new wife of his, letting her tell him how to raise us, right? So I got really defiant, angry, upset, didn't even know why. Started doing really bad in school, stopped going to school. I kind of took to a neighborhood guy of ours named Joe Valerio, who at the time was a gang leader, sold drugs, but it wasn't that I took to necessarily. I think it was later on, but what I took to from him was just the appreciation and his love for just me, right? And he kind of put me under his wing, so to speak. And so that I appreciated and loved, and I always craved that. I always craved the brotherhood. I always craved a mentor. I always craved someone to look up to, because I believe that if you can look up and you can keep your eyes focused, you can become really whatever you want. And at the time, that's what I wanted, right? That's what I was missing in life. My self-confidence had probably diminished, obviously, at that point in time, and I had nowhere to go. Home just wasn't a reality for me. So, got involved there. And then there was a moment too where, and I remember very distinctly, like my life changed as far as like business in this sense. And I was probably 12 years old when I was at Joe's house, and he just got out the shower and he was putting on his pants. So he's buckling his buckle, and he had this big fat wad of money in his hand, and he put it in his mouth so that he could buckle his buckle. And it was so large that he couldn't get it in his mouth. And he said, "Here, hold this." And he gave it to me. And at that moment, I'm like, damn, I want to have some money like this. And that's kind of when my life changed. And I started to realize like he was solving a lot of problems with money, right? I saw him help his family. I saw him help other people in our neighborhood. And it just felt right. And a lot of people looked up to him. So from that moment there, I essentially chasing the dollar, right? And I found myself soon after that selling drugs. It was crack cocaine. I was 13 years old. I got caught in middle school selling it, and they sent me to Lincoln Hills, which is a boys' prison. I had no idea what the hell was going on. I'm like, oh, got caught, throw me in a hoosegow, and there I just lived. There was no sense. I was just rolling with the punches. I was in Lincoln Hills. I had maybe I think it was like a 1-year sentence, but I never got out. Like I went there, started fighting, started kind of, falling myself in the same mix that I found myself on the outside, just rolling with the punches, no real goals, no sense of clarity. So I did that until I was about 17. 17, I got a mandatory release. I left Lincoln Hills and decided to go work for my uncles, because early on I would once in a while work for my uncles doing roofing. And I worked for them for about, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks. And the boss man, Billy the Kid was his name. It was time for payroll, and he pulled out this big bag of cocaine and said, "Hey, I can either give you cash or I can give you this. This is going to be worth more." And I'm like, well, if it's worth more, I want that. So I took it and I went to go distribute it. And it didn't take me long. It was like overnight it went. And I definitely had more than what I earned roofing. And it didn't become long before I just go re-up. I'd re-up from him, and people started calling me, and I had a little customer base and seemingly did well. Didn't really go back to work for that. And from 17 to about, let's say 20, 21 years old, that's the life I was living. And in between that time, I was not only selling drugs, but I was just creating some really bad habits. It was drinking, hanging out, no life goals. I was saving money. I had money, but didn't know what to do with any of it. Didn't know really how to live, or anybody to teach me how to respect or do any of these things that I crave now. So I found myself in the penitentiary at about 21 years old, and that's where my life changed. You see, I was sitting at a metal bench playing cards, bright lights over me, when I heard over the intercom, "Shaw to the door." I thought, I'm like, this is weird. So I went to the door. They said, "Come on through." So I opened the door, came on through, and the guard walked me down the hall, and they said, "You got a call?" And I said, "Well, this is weird because you don't get calls in prison. You have to pay to make them." And so they walked me into a room, and they pointed to a phone, and it was already sitting on the desk. And I looked around the room, and I picked it up, and I'm like, "Hello?" And it was my mom on the other line. She said, "Josh, it's your dad." And I'm like, "What about him?" He's like, "He's dead." I just broke down. I didn't even ask how or why. I just broke down. I'm like, what happened? I just couldn't understand. I'm like, there's no way that he's dead. There's no possible way. Like, this relationship that I had with my dad was always strained throughout the years, right? It never really got repaired because I had so much resentment towards him for leaving us. I blamed him for leaving us in a bad spot and leaving my mom to kind of set up with these boyfriends. So there was a lot of blame, a lot of resentment. Later, I found out it was from suicide. And I went back to a holding cell. They said, "Josh, you can go to general population, or I can put you in this holding cell." I said, "Put me in a holding cell." And I sat there for days, just trying to clear my mind, really. Trying to understand what happened, right? And then it just overcame me. I never got the chance to make my dad proud. I never got the chance to tell him how I really felt, how I loved him. And then I thought to myself, would that have changed anything? Did he bear the burden too, right? Because we're all living this thing called life. It's just not me and my feelings. And I started to understand that, and I started to just try to understand myself and try to understand him and his position. And I just went on this lifelong journey of just trying to become better. And my first step to that was forgiveness, right? I had to be able to forgive myself. And that was first, because I was constantly asking for forgiveness from everybody else. And I just realized I just need to forgive myself. And then once I forgave myself, I just went through this journey and these motions of trying to understand, trying to be better. I grabbed books. I looked at people now, not necessarily like Joe Valerio, but other guys that I modeled in business. And when I got out, I decided to start a roofing company. And, just like anything else, this process was slow. Over time, I built momentum, and I started seeing some real money from it. I felt like I was finally in a good spot, right? I finally had money. I was stable. I didn't have to go back to selling drugs, because that was one of my things, is I felt like if I couldn't make it in the real world, I would always fall back to that. So that fear was over. And I started to realize too, that I had more money than a lot of my peers, a lot of my family members, mom, aunts, uncles. And I felt like I had a sense of making it. And I went on like that for a couple of years. And then I also felt too, this ain't good. I don't like this feeling either. I felt like I was this is all life has to offer. This is what I'm going to get up and do for the rest of my life. And there was a moment there that I had where I was for me, it was more growth. And I started kind of manifesting some stuff in my life. And I saw some real some real change happen. And when I say manifestation, I was always thinking about these large commercial roofing projects that I see guys on. And I thought to myself, like, man, it'd be awesome to see me do some, like, I'd love to do some commercial projects like that. And by the time you knew it, like the following year, I was doing large commercial projects, and that's all I was doing. So, and I noticed that there was one other manifestation thing that I had, and that was when I got out of prison, I'd accumulated some debt, and I went to go see an attorney to get me out of debt. And as I'm sitting at his desk, he's having me sign the paperwork. He hands me a pen, and I'm signing the paper. I'm like, this is a really nice pen. And he says to me, he goes, you like that pen? You can have it. And I said, thanks. I said, this is going to be my new $1 million pen. And he laughed. I laughed. Given the situation, I'm trying to sign myself to get out of debt. And from then on, I always called it my $1 million pen. And there was actually a time where I was signing invoices and I left it in someone's vehicle. And I was panicking because later that night, I didn't realize where my pen was. And I called him. I said, did I leave my pen in your truck? He said, you sure did. I said, I'm on my way to get it. He said, what? You're like 45 minutes, an hour away. Why are you coming to get this pen? I said, I'm on my way. He comes, gives it to me. I said, this is my $1 million pen. He goes, it must be. And it's funny because all that was like, it was manifestation in the making. And like 2 years after that, I ended up signing my first $1 million deal with that pen. And I continue to sign $1 million deals with that pen. So that pen has really become my $1 million pen. So back to this manifestation thing with this commercial stuff, I started to notice it and I started to see it change. And then I started to realize, hey, maybe there's more to life. Maybe life is whatever I can truly make of it, right? So I started shooting real big. And I grew my roofing company from small to about $6 million in revenue. And I only had $3 million in revenue as a goal. So I surpassed that. So I'm starting to see big progress. But I had an opportunity to sell my business, which I did. Found myself kind of twiddling my thumbs. So I started a passion project, which was Lightspeed. And I think that's how you and I kind of got introduced there. And I went back to the drawing board and I thought to myself, I want to make sure I'll get lucky the first time. So I started another roofing company, which is New Roofs Inc. And we've been doing really well. And meanwhile, we've been acquiring other roofing companies. I also have a flooring store. We've also acquired now 3 other flooring stores. So that's kind of where I'm sitting at today, Nathan.
I love it. I love it. So I want to unpack a few things from your story that I think could be helpful for our listeners here. First things, though, let's take care of some housekeeping. Okay. I need that pin.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
I'll be gladly to share it with you.
You look at the number of pivotal moments through your life. Mm-hmm. And as you sit there today and you reflect back, I mean, a ton of adversity. And you could have stayed angry. You could have stayed very bitter, but you didn't. And you charted a path to say you needed to change. And I think a lot of us get stuck in a victim mindset. We get stuck in feeling sorry for ourselves. We get stuck in, we can't see the horizon of really what's there. But I think what I heard in your story is you made a change and said, I have to change myself.
Yeah. So let me tell you a story. And we talk about adversity and we talk about 2 different mindsets, right? And how one life-changing moment can take us 2 different directions. Okay, and this goes back to my dad, and I haven't shared this with anybody else. I think I've told you, but I haven't shared this with an audience. But prior to me going to prison, it was sometime before Christmas, and my dad and I, we were out. He was drinking. I was also drinking. I begged him. I said, let's just call a taxi. We'll just get a taxi home. He refused. He started driving. We exchanged words. He had said he was going to kick my ass. I said, come on, bring it. Car pulled over. He got out and I hit him and the fight ended. And all I can see was blood from his eye. It stopped. Like the fight stopped and I just couldn't help. He went to the hospital. He ended up getting stitches. And from there, like I didn't talk to him after that. That's the way I left my relationship with my dad, is that right there. Like, and I had to consume that, right? I had to consume that. I soaked it in. And still to this day, man, it's one of my biggest regrets. One of my top regrets to this day. So that's me in my story, right? From there, my brother somewhat shares a similar story. And that is, my brother gets a call and it's from my dad. It's probably like 1 and 2 in the morning and he ignores the call. gets another call, ignores it, gets another call, ignores it. He's like, I'm just going to talk to him tomorrow. He thinks in his mind. Well, that call was that night. He was calling my brother to save him. And he leaves a voicemail on my brother's phone saying, hey, buddy, just wanted to call and tell you that I love you. It chokes me up when I have to say this, but he says, I just wanted to call and tell you that I love you and that I'm going to be all right. And that's the last my brother's heard from him. And my brother, again, didn't have that chance, right? Didn't have that there with him. And he carried the burden. What if I would have answered that phone call? Would he still be here today? He's taking it in. I went this direction with that adversity. My brother went to heroin and every other drug in the book. He's now serving an 8-year sentence in the penitentiary. He calls me from prison often, and still to this day, I can tell it chokes him up. He doesn't have the heart to face and forgive himself for that. He's constantly running. He was caught by the police running. And I said to my mom, I said, he ain't running from nobody. The only person that he's running from is himself, because he can't step up and forgive himself and see, like, this is a learning moment and you can take it and you can run either direction. So to your point about adversity and deciding to take something and either soaking in it or doing something with it, something positive and impacting people like we are today on this podcast.
And I'll never forget sitting with you in Milwaukee at the Iron Horse and you telling me that story, and the same emotion that's in you today was there with you then. And what was impactful for me is this idea of running. We're either running towards the life we want or we're running away from the life we're trying to avoid. But we're running one way or the other. You know, you and I have talked about, and the people that have been around me long enough, I always use the buffalo as my analogy. You know, the buffalo will face the storms knowing if they go into the storm, they'll get through the storm, and there are sunny days on the other side of that storm, versus the cattle who see the storm on the prairie and they run away from it. So the hope you are giving us today, and by telling us your story, you faced the storm. You faced the storm of your own life that you couldn't forgive yourself. You never processed all the things that have wired your brain at a very young age, self-reflecting on that, using that as your trampoline, looking at that adversity to strengthen you, to make you into the man you are today.
Yes.
And so as you reflect today on Josh Shaw, and I remember Josh Shaw, and when I first met Josh, sells this company, buys this beautiful white Lamborghini. He's doing a lot of cool things, got this very contagious smile and enthusiasm about him. But one thing I've appreciated about you, you're not done. Even as we got to spend some time with each other here just a couple weeks ago, you're looking at that next evolution of how do I become a better man? How do I become a better human being? So speak to that for our listeners. Where's that thirst come from? And what are you doing to quench that thirst of being a better human being?
I think it's a good question. It goes back to, those few years that I had where I felt like I had it, right? Like I felt like I was doing better. I was in a good position, but there was still something I was longing for. And that was, for me, I truly believe, and I didn't know it then, but I believe now, I was just longing for a better me. Like for me, it was the accomplishment of just becoming that better person, even if it was a little bit. I just want to become better at life, at being a better husband, at hopefully someday being a better father, being a better businessman, right? Being a better leader. All those things are not something that you're just born with, but there's something that you have to learn, right? And you have to appreciate. And for me, I feel like everyone out there, so I use this analogy for myself, but I think, like, I picture myself as a library, and everyone that I meet is a book, right? And I'm accumulating these books for my library. So learning from everyone has just been, for me, probably the biggest change that I have in my life. And especially from you, Nate, like, I've learned so much from you, how articulate you are, how genuine, the events, how caring you are. Like, you're a true person that wants to help people, but I think it's because you've helped yourself and it's possible, right? So that's kind of the same place that I'm at, is just the climb is what really grabs my thirst. Not necessarily the accomplishments. And I think we did an exercise at your thing, and we really changed my my mind is that you had us all write down some top moments in our lives and you had us label them. Are they relationships? Are they experiences? Are they items? And then what was the fourth one?
Accomplishments.
Accomplishments. And none of them were items. A lot of them were relationships and accomplishments, or experiences rather too, but none of them were items. Talk about the white Lamborghini. That wasn't on my list, right? So I've learned now that it's really about the journey. I try to make it as difficult as I can to make sure that I have it. And that's why I started that second company, right? The New Roofs Inc. I started from scratch. I didn't want help. I wanted to run it like it was an actual business. I didn't want to take a bunch of my personal money and stick it into it and have it be successful. I wanted to start it from scratch to see if I really have what it takes to start a business, to grow a business, and then sell a business again. So for me, it's really about the journey.
Yeah. So Josh, there's a word that we'll talk a lot about in the definition of affluence. Mm-hmm. And when I bring up the word affluence, people will think right off the bat, it's about money. And I love what you just said is that, on your list of best moments wasn't the white Lamborghini, but isn't that some of the stuff that we think if we chase and get, that's going to make us happy? But that didn't make your list. Some of my own objects didn't even make my list. So when we look at affluence, a true definition of affluence is a flowing towards an abundant supply of options to live a life that we desire. So that is, yes, is that our bank accounts? Sure, that's part of it. Is it our 401k, IRA? Is it some of those things? Absolutely. But you know what it really more is? It's about our relationships with people. Relationships with our family members. It's the experiences. It's our children's education. All of those things go into our own life of affluence. And taking time to reflect on that and understanding why we're doing it versus just chasing the wind. Mm-hmm. And I think you've done a beautiful job of that. So I want to end this discussion, Josh, with a few calls to actions for our listeners. And so if you were to give some advice to the people about how do they, wherever they're at, whether they're in a really bad spot in their life or they're merely surviving, or even if they're thriving, what are things they can do to become better leaders, to strengthen their relationships, and to really provide them with hope on why they're on this earth today?
Absolutely. So I think, number one, it's just ground zero. For me, it's ground zero is you. It starts with you. I think you recommend a book. It essentially just tells you that everyone in your life currently is all that you need to know, right? And I believe everything that you have inside you is everything you need to become successful, right? You just have to dig deep enough to find it, right? There's a treasure that lies inside you. What is it? Right. And sometimes the self-reflection is what it takes to become that person. Right. For me, it was having to forgive myself. But then there was also many steps after that I had to take. But that was number one for me. Right. But everything that I needed was already right there.
Let's stay there for a minute. The book you're referencing is The Power of Who. And for the listeners that are listening, go read The Power of Who. It's a very powerful book that talks about everyone we need to know to grow our lives are usually right there around us. We just have to make sure we lean into them. So it's a super valuable book. Another one I'm going to give, because you mentioned about the best moments, that exercise we did, a great book for people to look at to do some self-reflection is John Acuff's book, is All It Takes Is a Goal. It's a great self-reflection book to understand where you're at today, looking back at your past in order to conquer your future. So I agree with you 100%, Josh. Number one, it's about you. People don't always like when I make this statement, but I had to make the statement when I look myself in the mirror. Hey, if your life sucks, it's because you suck. So the solution is stop sucking. So how do you stop sucking? Is you got to do some self-reflection. I strongly believe God doesn't make junk. We're all made in his self-image. He don't make junk. He gives us all gifts, talents, and abilities. Those are his gifts to us. What is our gift back to him is what we do with them. That's number one. Give us number two.
Number two is you have to come to the reality that no one's going to save you. You have to give that thought up. No one's going to come and save you. You have to save yourself. And saving yourself means looking at yourself, understanding yourself, appreciating yourself, right? Those are the steps. That's saving yourself, is salvaging, taking responsibility. I truly believe that was another pivotal moment for me, is just consuming as much responsibility that you can take. Because I believe once you take the responsibility, you are now in control of it. right? If you want to constantly point fingers and blame, they're in control of your life, not you.
Beautiful. I love it. I love it. I love it. And one more.
I'm not going to dive too much into the self stuff. I think high level, as far as like accomplishing dreams, like going back to manifestation and just knowing that it is possible, believing that it is possible, just because you can't see it and it's not necessarily instant, or you can't grab it, it's not instantaneous, right? That it does live there. I mean, I just gave you 2 examples earlier of the pen and the commercial stuff, and it still happens to me to this day. Sometimes the stuff that I'm asking for now takes a little bit longer, but believe that it's possible. Believe in yourself and believe that it's possible.
What I hear there is our environment is super critical.
Absolutely.
You know, as a young boy, you looked up to Joe. Joe taught you some things, even though Joe was not the greatest dude.
Yeah.
But you migrated to him because Joe, your environment of people you put yourself around, what kind of human beings are they that can lean in you for who you are, no matter what you've done, and be able to lean in you. So finding the right environment. And so before we came into this discussion today, you were telling me a story. And I think about the story you told me as it relates to this idea of environment. And it's the shark. You got this big shark hanging above you on your wall.
Yeah.
And you told me the story of how you caught that shark in Mexico the day before your wedding.
Yeah.
So that represents a best moment to you.
Sure.
Right? And you also then talked about, well, what does a shark represent? So speak to that for a moment.
I believe a shark is misunderstood, right? I think once you understand a shark and you know the way it moves and how it acts, a shark's not really scary at all, but we just perceive it as scary. And I believe truly in this world, it's either you learn to swim with sharks or you get eaten by them. And I've just learned to swim with sharks by understanding them and how they move. And also myself too, as far as reaction to fears, right? So that's kind of my analogy with sharks, because I do believe that in any world, there's sharks all over the place, and you gotta learn to swim with them, or you're gonna get eaten by them.
And Josh, don't people sometimes look at us as a shark?
Absolutely.
Don't you ever feel misunderstood? Because I feel misunderstood at times.
Sure.
And so I think the shark is a great analogy. They're not bad animals. They're misunderstood animals. No different than us at times. But for us to really be understood, it takes what you've talked about of some self-reflection, creating a better environment. And that's how we start to accomplish some great things in our lives. And so as I close this, I want you to think about what Josh said today, and I want you to do your own self-reflection. I want you to do some of the calls to actions. Consider picking up the book or listening to the audio version of The Power of Who or John Acuff's book, All It Takes Is a Goal. Think about this analogy of the shark, and do you feel misunderstood? Because I know if you're anything like me, I oftentimes feel that way. How can we improve that? How do the people that we are looking as sharks, well, maybe we need to lean into them and get more curious about them and strengthen those relationships. So Josh, I thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Is there any last things you want to share with our listeners before we close?
No, just selfishly, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you talking about environment. I think, you're one of the top guys that I look up to, and I appreciate everything that you do and who you are as a person. So thank you very much, Nathan, for having me on and for being the person that you are.
Appreciate it. And I'll look for that pin in the mail, brother.
You can find more thoughts on how to move beyond bricks at drnathanunruh.com.